In this episode, we explore a tension that shows up in nearly every modern security program. You want fast, consistent responses to threats, and you also want to avoid building automation so powerful that a single compromise turns it into an attacker's remote control. Automation can make defense more reliable because machines do not get tired, forget steps, or panic. But automation can also amplify mistakes because machines can execute the wrong action at scale in seconds. SecDevOps is a way of thinking and working where security, development, and operations practices are blended so that building, deploying, and protecting systems becomes a single continuous effort rather than separate handoffs. When these ideas come together, teams can detect issues earlier, respond faster, and reduce the gap between what they know and what they fix. The risk is that automation often needs credentials, access, and authority, and those are exactly the things attackers seek. Our goal is to build a clear, beginner-friendly model for how to automate responsibly, so response becomes quicker and more dependable without turning your automation into a master key that opens every door. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. To start, it helps to define automation and security response as more than just running a script when an alert fires. Automation includes collecting signals, normalizing them, making decisions, and then taking actions, and each of those stages has its own risks. Collecting signals means pulling in logs, events, and other evidence from many parts of a system, which requires access to sources of truth. Normalizing signals means translating diverse data into a consistent form so it can be evaluated, which can introduce errors if assumptions are wrong. Decision-making means deciding whether something is malicious or benign and what should be done next, which can be tricky because the world is messy and attackers try to look normal. Taking action means doing something that changes system state, like isolating an account, blocking a network path, or rolling back a change, and those actions can be harmful if triggered incorrectly. A safe design recognizes that these stages are not equally risky, and it avoids giving the same level of power to every part of the automation pipeline. The main principle is that you separate observation from action, and you make high-impact actions harder to trigger than low-impact actions. A useful way to think about the danger is to imagine what an attacker would do if they could control your automation. They would not just try to hide. They would try to use your own trusted mechanisms to move faster and more quietly. If automation can disable monitoring, rotate keys, modify access rules, or deploy new code, then the attacker can cause both damage and confusion, making incident response slower and less confident. Even if automation only has modest permissions, an attacker could use it to create distractions, such as triggering blocks that disrupt legitimate users or flooding defenders with false alerts. This is why it is not enough to say automation is good or bad. The question is whether automation is designed with the assumption that it might be targeted. Secure automation treats its own credentials, decision logic, and action pathways as high-value assets that must be protected and constrained. In other words, automation is not just a tool that helps security, it is also a thing that must be secured like any other critical component. Now connect this to SecDevOps, which is not a product but a practice of integrating security into the way systems are built and operated. The idea is that when development and operations move quickly, security cannot be a gate that only appears at the end, because that creates delays and workarounds. Instead, security requirements, checks, and response capabilities are built into the same workflows that create and deploy software. That means you can detect risky changes earlier, enforce consistent standards, and reduce the chance that a system drifts into an insecure state over time. The automation part often includes automated testing of security properties, automated scanning for known weaknesses, automated validation of configurations, and automated deployment of fixes when safe to do so. The response part can include automatic enrichment of alerts with context, automatic routing to the right team, and automatic containment actions when confidence is high. When these pieces are integrated, defenders are not constantly starting from scratch, and they can spend more time on analysis and less time on repetitive work. One of the most important design choices is deciding what should be fully automated, what should be semi-automated, and what should remain manual. Fully automated actions should be the ones where the cost of being wrong is low and the confidence of detection is high. For example, quarantining a known malicious file might be safer to automate than disabling a human user's account, because an account lockout can disrupt critical work and can be abused as denial of service if triggered incorrectly. Semi-automation often means the system gathers context, prepares a recommended action, and then a human approves it, which is slower but safer for high-impact decisions. Manual actions remain necessary when situations are ambiguous, rare, or complex, because humans can consider nuance and exceptions that an automated rule might miss. The point is not to distrust automation. It is to match automation to risk. If you automate high-impact actions without careful safeguards, you might respond quickly, but you might also create an attacker-friendly environment where one mistake becomes a widespread outage. A key safeguard is limiting the permissions of automation identities, which is the same principle as least privilege applied to machines. Automation should have only the access needed to perform its tasks, and those tasks should be designed so they do not require broad authority. If an automation process needs to update a specific category of settings, it should not also have permissions to create new administrator accounts. If it needs to isolate a device from the network, it should not have the ability to modify the entire network policy for all devices. This requires designing the system with narrow control points, which means building safe interfaces for automation to use. When you create narrow interfaces, you can validate inputs, restrict scope, and monitor actions more clearly. Narrow interfaces also make it harder for attackers to repurpose automation because even if they gain control, the automation cannot suddenly do unrelated high-impact actions. This is how you avoid handing attackers the keys, by ensuring the keys automation holds only open small, specific doors. Another safeguard is separating automation duties so that no single automated process can both decide and execute every high-impact action without checks. If the same mechanism detects an issue, decides the response, and has direct power to apply the response, then compromise of that mechanism can be devastating. Separation can mean that detection occurs in one component, decision logic in another, and execution in a constrained action service that enforces rules regardless of who requests the action. That execution service can require additional conditions, such as confirmation from an independent signal, rate limits to prevent mass changes, or approval for actions above a threshold. Even without naming any products, you can understand this as building a safety interlock into the automation system, similar to how industrial machines have emergency stops and protective covers. These interlocks exist because engineers accept that mistakes happen, sensors fail, and people sometimes behave maliciously. Security automation should be designed with the same realism, assuming that errors and adversaries are part of the environment. Data quality and decision quality are also critical, because automation is only as good as the signals it relies on. If signals are incomplete, delayed, or easy to spoof, automation can be tricked into taking the wrong action. Attackers might try to create patterns that look like normal behavior, or they might deliberately trigger automation in ways that cause disruption, such as causing accounts to be locked or services to be blocked. This is why confidence scoring, multiple independent signals, and careful tuning matter, even at a conceptual level. A safe automation design expects false positives and builds a strategy for them, such as preferring reversible actions, limiting scope, and requiring additional confirmation for irreversible changes. Reversible actions are important because they allow you to recover quickly if automation was wrong, and quick recovery is a key part of resilient defense. When defenders can reverse an action safely, they can afford to automate more aggressively because the consequences of error are contained. The SecDevOps angle adds another important dimension. Automation is not only about response after something bad happens, but also about preventing bad states from ever being deployed. If insecure configurations or vulnerable components are caught before deployment, you reduce the number of emergencies you face later. This is often described as shifting security earlier, meaning you perform checks during design, build, and deployment rather than only during incident response. The danger, again, is that automated deployment mechanisms can become extremely powerful and attackers may try to compromise them because they can change many systems at once. A secure approach treats deployment and automation pipelines as critical infrastructure, with strong authentication, restricted access, and careful separation of duties. It also means that changes to the automation itself should be reviewed and monitored, because altering automation logic is a high-impact change. If attackers can change the rules that decide what is safe, they can turn the system into a factory for insecure deployments. Monitoring and logging of automation actions is another concept that beginners sometimes overlook because it feels like extra paperwork. In reality, logging is how you maintain accountability and learn from mistakes, and it is also how you detect misuse. Every automated action should produce evidence that explains what triggered it, what decision was made, what action was taken, and what the outcome was. This evidence should be protected so it cannot be easily altered by an attacker who compromises the automation. Logging also enables continuous improvement, because teams can look for patterns like recurring false positives or actions that frequently require manual reversal. Over time, this feedback loop helps refine automation so it becomes both safer and more effective. Without that feedback loop, automation tends to drift into two bad extremes. Either it is too timid and does nothing useful, or it is too aggressive and causes frequent disruptions. Good security automation is disciplined and observable, meaning it can be trusted because its behavior can be understood and verified. It is also important to discuss safe defaults and rate limiting, because automation can cause harm simply by acting too quickly and too broadly. Safe defaults mean that when automation is uncertain, it chooses actions that minimize harm, such as alerting and gathering more context rather than taking an irreversible step. Rate limiting means automation is prevented from making too many changes in a short time, which is a protection against both runaway mistakes and attacker misuse. For example, if a rule mistakenly flags thousands of accounts, rate limiting can prevent mass lockouts that would cripple an organization. Rate limiting can also force a pause that gives humans a chance to notice something abnormal and intervene. These safeguards might seem like they reduce the value of automation, but they actually increase trust, which is what makes automation usable at scale. When people trust automation, they rely on it consistently, and consistent reliance is what turns automation into real operational speed. Another common misconception is that the goal is to make everything automatic and remove humans from the loop. In security, removing humans entirely can be dangerous because attackers adapt and because context matters. The better goal is to automate the boring, repetitive, and low-risk tasks, and to use automation to bring humans better context and better options for the tasks that require judgment. Automation can gather evidence, correlate signals, and prepare containment steps, but humans can decide when the business impact of containment is acceptable and when the situation requires a different approach. In a SecDevOps culture, humans also focus on improving the system over time, making security a continuous improvement process rather than a series of emergencies. This balance makes defense both faster and more thoughtful. It also reduces burnout, which is a real risk in security operations, because a burnt-out team is more likely to make mistakes and accept risky shortcuts. As we bring these ideas together, the central lesson is that secure automation is engineered, not merely added. You design automation with constrained identities, separated responsibilities, narrow action interfaces, and safeguards like confirmation requirements, reversible actions, careful logging, and rate limiting. You integrate security into development and operations workflows so that many problems are prevented before they require emergency response, and you protect the automation and deployment mechanisms as high-value targets. If you do these things, automation becomes a force multiplier for defenders rather than a liability that attackers can hijack. When you do not do these things, automation can turn small errors into widespread outages, and it can provide attackers with a trusted pathway to scale their impact. The beginner mindset to cultivate is to ask two questions whenever automation is proposed. What authority does it need? And what happens if that authority is misused? If you can answer those questions honestly and design controls around them, you can gain the speed and consistency of automation without handing attackers the keys to your system.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.